In 2600 BCE, an Egyptian overseer named Khnumhotep recorded something that would feed civilizations for 46 centuries. Not a pharaoh, not a priest, an ordinary man who noticed something strange in the Nile's floodplains. The method could outperform modern wheat farms in yield per labor hour and hydroponic systems in nutrient density. It worked on land that experts today would call unusable. Once you understood the cycle, it produced grain year after year, without buying seeds, without chemical fertilizers, without irrigation infrastructure. This method survived the Bronze Age collapse, the fall of Rome, and 2 millennia of empire turnover. Not because of technology, because of biology. But in your world, the modern world of grocery stores and subsidized monoculture, most people have never been taught what those floodplain farmers knew. Even though this system fed every major Mediterranean civilization for 3,000 years, even though it fed the 30,000 workers who built the pyramids, even though it sustained Athens at its peak and kept Roman legions marching across continents. That silence is not accidental. Today we are building what I call the perpetual grain system, in your backyard, on your small acreage, even on a suburban lot. By the time you finish this video, you will have the complete blueprint for a self-seeding grain system that replants itself every year, feeds your soil instead of depleting it, and produces more than any family could eat. 5 years from now, when your neighbors are panicking over food prices, waiting in lines, rationing store-bought bread, you will walk outside with a basket. You will run your hand through golden stalks you did not plant that spring, and you will feel something money cannot buy: sovereignty. But first you need to understand what happened, and why you were never taught this. 4,600 years ago, in the black silt left by the Nile's annual flood, Egyptian farmers discover something counterintuitive. They call this soil Kemet, the black land. And in that dark, rich earth, they scatter something no modern agronomist would recommend. They mix their crops: emmer wheat alongside barley, lentils tangled with flax. 4 species in one field. Every instinct says this should fail. Instead, yields climb. The fields that grow multiple crops together outproduce the fields planted with one. The farmers don't understand the nitrogen cycle. They don't know about mycorrhizal networks, the fungal threads trading nutrients underground. But they observe something undeniable: the land doesn't die, it gets stronger. That knowledge travels from the Nile across the Mediterranean. And then something unexpected happens that makes it unstoppable. Fast forward 2,000 years. By the time of the Roman Republic, floodplain wisdom has evolved into formal agricultural science. And the man who does the most to preserve it is the last person you'd expect: Cato the Elder. The Roman senator, famous for one thing above all: standing in the Senate and demanding the total destruction of Carthage. A war hawk, a hardliner. He writes one book in his entire life, not about war, about farming. The Agricultura devotes more pages to grain polyculture, to the careful interplanting of cereals and legumes, than to any military strategy. Roman farmers take this seriously. They codify the 3-field system with integrated legumes, not because they understand nitrogen fixation, because they measure yields obsessively and the numbers don't lie. Some of these Roman grain estates produce continuously for 400 years, no fallow seasons, no soil collapse, no one importing fertilizer. The system feeds itself. Then Rome falls, and the knowledge nearly dies with it. Nearly. In the chaos after the collapse, one institution quietly preserves what the legions abandon: the monasteries. Benedictine monks face an impossible situation. Small plots, no slave labor, harsh northern European winters. They should starve. They should fail. Instead, they innovate. They adapt Mediterranean polyculture to cold climates, combine it with careful seed selection, and write everything down, in Latin, in illuminated manuscripts, hidden in monastery libraries. Some of those monastery grain plots operate continuously from the 6th century to the Reformation, over 1,000 years, same soil, no synthetic inputs. The knowledge was safe until a new world was discovered and a new kind of farming arrived. When European colonizers arrived in the Americas, they brought monoculture, single-crop farming, a system that evolved not from peasant wisdom tested over millennia, but from aristocratic estates optimized for one thing: cash export. Monoculture required buying seeds every year. It required stripping nutrients from the soil until the land turned gray and lifeless, and it required increasingly desperate chemical interventions just to maintain baseline yields, but it produced more in the short term. It was easier to mechanize. It looked like progress. The old polyculture grain system seemed primitive, peasant farming, subsistence methods. It was not primitive. It was resilient. That distinction got buried. By the 20th century, polyculture grain growing had become a quaint historical curiosity, something for living history museums, something for reenactors in period costume. Not serious food production, not real agriculture. Government subsidies flowed to corn monocultures and wheat monocultures. Agricultural colleges taught chemical inputs and mechanical efficiency. The thousand-year monastery plots became tourist attractions. The knowledge that fed Rome, that survived the Dark Ages, that built civilizations, forgotten. The knowledge had been buried, not by accident, by economics. In the 1980s, at Washington State University, agronomists began studying what they called intercropping systems, the scientific term for what Egyptian farmers had done 40 centuries earlier. The results were stunning. Wheat legume polyculture systems produced 20 to 40% more total food value per acre than wheat monoculture, and they used zero synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Zero. To put that in perspective, modern wheat monoculture requires about 150 pounds of synthetic nitrogen per acre every year. It still depletes soil organic matter by 1 to 2% annually. The fields get weaker. The inputs get heavier. The cycle never ends. The polyculture studies were published in peer-reviewed journals. Agricultural extension offices received the research, and then the momentum stopped. Funding shifted back to monoculture optimization. Because here's the reality no one will say out loud. The moment you build a self-seeding polyculture grain system, you stop buying seeds, you stop buying fertilizer, you stop being a customer. And the agricultural input industry, valued at over $250 billion globally per year, has no incentive to teach you independence, but the knowledge survived in research papers, on small farms, in seed-saving networks. Because once you understand the nitrogen cycle and companion planting, the system runs itself. The perpetual grain system is not just about planting wheat. Wheat is only one piece of a 5-part biological engine. First, you have the nitrogen fixers. Legumes like Austrian winter peas, crimson clover, or vetch. These are not just cover crops. They are your fertilizer factory. Legumes form symbiotic relationships with rhizobium bacteria in their root nodules. These bacteria pull nitrogen straight from the atmosphere, which is 78% of the air you're breathing right now, and convert it into plant-available ammonium. The legumes feed the bacteria. The bacteria fix nitrogen. The nitrogen feeds the grain. The grain residue feeds the soil biology. The cycle closes. A well-established legume understory fixes 80 to 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre per year. That replaces $100 to $150 worth of synthetic fertilizer. Forever. Your fertilizer bill drops to zero. Permanently. Second, you have your primary grain. Wheat, barley, rye, or heritage varieties like emmer or einkorn. The same grains those Egyptian farmers scattered in the Kemet 4,000 years ago. This is not just your harvest, it is your seed bank. In a self-seeding system, you harvest 70 to 80% of the grain. The rest shatters naturally onto the soil, overwinters, and germinates in spring. No replanting required. The stalks fall and become mulch. The mulch protects soil. Protected soil retains moisture. Moisture fuels spring germination. 1,000 square feet of grain plot produces 25 to 50 pounds of grain annually. Enough for a loaf of bread every week for a year. Third, you have the soil protectors. Your mulch layer straw, fallen leaves, chipped wood. This is not just ground cover, it is your irrigation system and weed suppressor in one. Mulch cuts soil evaporation by 50 to 70%. A 4-inch layer reduces watering needs by 60% and eliminates most annual weed pressure. Mulch feeds earthworms. Earthworms create channels. Channels improve drainage. Drainage prevents root rot. Healthy roots grow more grain. Fourth, you have the soil biology. The invisible mycorrhizal fungal network connecting everything underground. This is not just dirt. It is your underground internet. Mycorrhizal fungi extend plant root systems by up to 1,000% accessing water and nutrients plants could never reach alone. They transfer nitrogen directly from legume roots to grain roots. Research shows mycorrhizal colonized plants can pull water from 15 feet away. The network expands every year. Fifth, you have the seed genetics. Open-pollinated, non-hybrid varieties that breed true from saved seed. This is not just your crop, it is your independence from the seed industry. Hybrid seeds don't reproduce true to type. Open-pollinated seeds can be saved and replanted indefinitely. Each generation adapts to your specific soil and climate. After 5 to 7 years of selection, your grain variety becomes uniquely yours. The system gets stronger, not weaker. You are designing a closed loop. Legumes feed soil. Soil feeds grain. Grain feeds you. Residue feeds soil biology. And you simply harvest what the system produces. So how do you actually build this? And what does it cost? Let me be specific. For a 500 square foot starter plot, enough to produce 15 to 25 pounds of grain per year, expect $75 to $200 total. One time. That breaks down to $15 to $30 for grain seed, $10 to $25 for legume seed, $20 to $50 for mulch materials, and $30 to $75 for optional soil amendments. Compare that to 5 years of buying organic flour at $6 per bag, 52 bags a year. $1,560 over 5 years for flour from depleted soil that left you dependent on the next purchase. Now, you see why this knowledge has been quietly left out of mainstream gardening education. Choose your site. 6 or more hours of direct sunlight. Minimal tree root competition. Minimum 100 square feet for a trial plot, 500 or more for family-scale production. You don't need perfect soil. The system builds soil quality over time. Prepare by sheet mulching. Apply 4 to 6 inches of mulch directly over existing grass or weeds. This smothers vegetation without tilling, preserving the mycorrhizal networks you're counting on. Traditional method. Wait 3 to 6 months for decomposition. Modern shortcut. Lay cardboard underneath, cut holes, plant through them. This looks like doing nothing. You're building the foundation, seed in fall. September through November for most climates. Broadcast. Grain seed at 2 to 3 pounds per 100 square feet. Mixed with legume seed at ½ pound to 1 pound. Scatter by hand in circular motions, or use a hand crank broadcaster. Winter grains develop stronger roots during cold months. Legumes establish nitrogen-fixing nodules before spring. Then walk away. Do almost nothing until summer. The system establishes itself through winter. Here's the patience ladder. Weeks 1 and 2, seed the plot, water lightly. Months 1 through 3, watch germination, expect sparse coverage. Months 4 through 6, winter dormancy. Your grain will look yellow and sad in February. Your legumes will look dead by January. Do not panic. Do not tear it out. Do not add fertilizer in desperation. The roots are working underground. Spring will prove the system alive. Months 7 through 9 bring the explosion green everywhere. Do almost nothing. Months 10 through 12, harvest when heads turn golden and dry. Year 1, expect 50 to 70% of optimal yield. Year 2, self-seeding kicks in with minimal replanting. Year 3, autonomous operation. You are not managing a project anymore. You are simply harvesting from a living system woven into your land. Now, let me address something most gardening channels ignore. Climate. The system adapts. In hot climates, zones 8 through 10 plant in November, harvest in April. In cold climates, zones 3 through 5 use winter rye instead of wheat. It tolerates negative 30 degrees, no extra materials. Just a timing shift. The Egyptians farmed desert heat. The monasteries farmed alpine cold. Your climate has already been tested. Legality. In most jurisdictions, growing grain for personal use requires no permits. You're growing ornamental grasses that produce edible seeds. HOAs regulate lawns, not meadow restoration. The grain grows waist high. Looks like landscaping. Neighbors will ask where you bought it. Perception. You're not preparing for collapse. You're participating in a tradition older than any nation on earth. The weirdness is not growing your own grain. The weirdness is that we stopped. This is what Namutepe understood 4,600 years ago, standing in the black silt of the Nile, watching grain rise from soil that never died. This is what the $250 billion agricultural industry has spent a century trying to make you forget. You need sunlight, water, a handful of seeds, and the patience to let biology do what it has always done. 5 years from now, when others are staring at price tags, rationing grocery trips, wondering where their next meal comes from, you will step outside with a basket. You will feel dry grain heads brushing your palms. You will thresh wheat with your own hands and taste bread that no supply chain can touch. Sovereignty. Not the loud kind that announces itself with flags and slogans. The quiet kind that does not need to, because you have built something that cannot be inflated, cannot be sanctioned, cannot be switched off. You have built abundance. If this awakens something in you, if you can see yourself harvesting golden grain from a plot that planted itself, subscribe. Share this with someone ready to stop being a customer and start being a producer. The knowledge is available. The seeds are waiting. The choice is yours.